Well, hello everyone. This is Mac with the No One's a Critic podcast with my co-host, Mr. Pierre Kino. How you doing today, Kino?
I am doing well, Mac. This whole last 2 weeks since the last time we recorded has been kind of a blur because I got Starfield, and I've
No,
pretty much just been doing that and putting off all the work on my channel.
that's sort of part of the reason why I ended up kind of, for me, for video games, it's one of those things where I've actually kind of gotten into more like what's that, like not like walking sims in particular, but I kind of like sort of like smaller indie games that take only like a couple hours to complete, because then I'm like, okay, I have a day off, I can kind of take care of it. Yeah. um because yeah, when Elden Ring came out, I was like I was gone. Like I was working on the channel, I was just all over the place. Which is part of the reason why I have held off from buying either Starfield or Armored Core 6. Those are two games that look really cool that I would like to play, but I'm a little bit afraid that I'm going to get too caught up and uh, it's the channel will suffer.
Yeah, I usually try to avoid AAA games, usually because they suck. Like a lot of indie games are a lot better. They have like it's a better experience start to finish than like something like the latest Assassin's Creed or Call of Duty or whatever. Those games usually suck. But I decided to make an exception for Starfield just because, I was like, I haven't bought a new release in a long time, and this is a big Bethesda game. It's their first new game in many years, but it's their first new IP in like 25 years. And
Yeah,
I obviously love the Elder
it's
Scrolls
not
and
Fallout, it's not Elder
yeah,
Scrolls.
exactly. And it's been okay. It's definitely a AAA game, which kind of to me nowadays means that there's a lot that it leaves to be desired. But the game is massive, and if you like that kind of Fallout style gameplay where you just go to an area, shoot some enemies, loot some stuff, and go do some quests or whatever, the game is pretty fun in that regard. And I've definitely, like you said, it's been to a little bit of a detriment of the channel, which is I don't as of right now I don't have a video ready for this Monday. We'll see if I can cram one in over the weekend, but we'll see.
It's funny because I actually think I have like sort of a what's what I'm looking for, a misdirected passion for Bethesda games because I love Fallout New Vegas,
Oh, that's my favorite game of all time.
but it's not Bethesda, right? It's
Yeah, I know. It's Obsidian.
so I kind of like
The best Bethesda game that they ever made was
it's
not
not
made by
Bethesda. Yeah,
Bethesda. Yeah.
it's like a movie. It's like one of those things where um, it's like, oh, I gotta go back and play Fallout 3, and I'm like, what the fuck is this? It's just it set the bar so high that's part of the reason why I'm kind of like, I guess, a bit hesitant about buying Starfield, where I'm just like, I feel like my that's how I felt. I even felt that way about the Outer Worlds, which was okay, but it just did not scratch the same itch as Fallout New Vegas did, and I don't think maybe nothing ever will. I don't know.
I don't think so. I think it was one of those like miracle games that just happened all the stars align where it all worked out to become like, in my opinion, like I said, my favorite video game of all time. Starfield is definitely not up to that level in terms of role playing that I think you can get in New Vegas. Although the game is huge, like again, there's like a hundred fucking planets you can go explore. There's not that much depth to it, at least for the 15-20 hours I've been putting into it so far. Um, but it is kind of fun on the surface level. Like I definitely will get at least like 50 to 100 hours out of this game just kind of exploring the surface. I don't know how much of it's a game I'll replay constantly like I do New Vegas, but like I said, it's been a fun little distraction so far.
Yeah, well, it's funny because I've been taking finishing the Avatar video. The scripting is almost done. I'm soldiering through it. It's one of those things where, like I said again, it's so beloved by so many people. I have to like, because I have a number of critiques, and I'm like, if I dole these critiques out, I have to make sure they're like rock solid. But so I've been spending like a lot of time just kind of like on the couch, just writing, like have a movie in the background, and it was it was weird. I saw that news out of Mexico about those alien bodies that they allegedly found, and it's like it's just so funny because they just look so fake. And maybe they're real. I don't know, but it's just funny that if they are real, that no one's gonna take it seriously because they look so goofy. Um, and then, but sure enough, as I'm going through like trying to find and watch a movie, I see that Signs with M. Night Shyamalan's Signs with Mel Gibson is on. And I was like, oh, I haven't seen that one in a while. So I threw it on. And I forgot how fucking good of a movie that is. That's like a very, very, very well made movie in terms of the tone, in terms of the atmosphere, the humor mixing in. It's got some of the funniest laugh out loud moments mixed in with some of the most like pulse pounding, scary moments. Um, I think, and it's funny because I honestly think, I mean, the movie doesn't have like it isn't remembered like super as like a terrible film. I know The Village is one that's really taken down. I think it's the ending that really gets people about Signs. It's kind of hit or miss.
Well, I think the thing about Signs, and this is we're talking about Shyamalan this episode, if you can't already tell, but the thing about Signs is I think it's a good movie too. Like, there's a lot of cool character stuff that it does with like the family that the mother's died, and there's this kind of like gloominess hanging over the family and the whole tone of the film that I think one of the reasons people don't, it's not that they hate it, but they don't really gel with the film, is that it's kind of weird to juxtapose that with a film about aliens, which is what it is. It's kind of got this family drama stuff, and it does connect. Like, the plot kind of connects in a semi contrived way. It's been a long time since I've seen Signs, but the whole premise of the movie is that the mother dying was kind of foretold, and there was like a hidden message in that for the family to deal with the aliens coming around, and it's just all these weird elements put together that I think people have a hard time kind of wrapping their minds around conceptually, and I think that's true of a lot of Shyamalan films.
I mean, with Signs, it's like, I mean, it kind of reminds me of like the Jurassic Park argument where it's like, everyone remembers the dinosaurs, but like, what is the actual like plot of the story? And it's about Grant and learning to become a father. Um, but that's like a whole sort of like, and that's I mean, like, it's pretty pronounced if you rewatch Jurassic Park. It's like really in your face. It's like not like subtle or anything. Um, but it's just because it's everyone remembers the
Mm-hmm.
dinosaurs and the chases and everything. Um, yeah, I mean, I think so. Yeah, I think the ending is the real. Well, I mean, it's a movie about a man who's like basically lost his faith.
Yeah,
Like, I mean, he's literally like a pastor who quits the church. So,
yeah.
like, it's again not very subtle. Um, yeah, and I was rewatching it, and I was like, wow, man, this guy M. Night Shyamalan, he is. I mean, like, now he's known as a joke. Like, if a movie comes out with his name on it, people are
Yeah.
like, hmm. I mean, I actually think he's kind of redeemed himself a little bit. He's come out with a couple bangers since, um, as time has gone on. But looking back in his early filmography, what was it? Let's see. He did a
uh
couple. He did a couple of independent stuff before, but The Sixth Sense was the big
Sixth
one,
Sense. Yeah.
which is still an excellent film. And then he followed it up with Unbreakable,
Mm-hmm.
another excellent movie,
That's a good movie.
and then Signs. And then there was The Village. Have you seen The
Yeah.
Village?
Yeah, I saw The Village. Yeah.
Okay. That's another movie where it's like I don't really think it deserves the hate it gets. I mean, it's again, the film is like the atmosphere is incredible, the scares and the sort of like the spookiness is excellent. I think for that one, the big issue is the ending. That with Signs, the ending is kind of some people are like, if you like it or not. I think the ending of The Village was like widely people were like, "What the fuck?"
Well, I think one of the reasons why Shyamalan has become kind of a joke is not necessarily the quality of his films. Like, I think there's a lot worse directors out there than Shyamalan, but the thing about Shyamalan is he's perceived as formulaic. Like, the whole thing about him is the twist, right? That's literally what he's known for, in the same way that like Tarantino's known for like pop culture dialogue and excessive violence and stuff. Like all these directors kind of have a thing, but with Shyamalan specifically, I think a lot of people reduced his filmmaking down to that one defining trait, and it became stereotyped, and then people kind of considered his work shallow because of that. Which I don't necessarily think is the case. I mean, I think some of the films are like, okay, there's not that much going on here. The Village is one of those where it's like, okay, I mean, it's a horror esque film with a twist to it. You know, I think, like I said, I think Signs was a really good film. I thought Unbreakable was a really good like deconstruction of the superhero genre. Before that was like a common thing. Like nowadays, there's a tons of films that like critique the superhero genre, but this was like early on in the whole in doing that kind of thing. So um, I thought a lot of his films were pretty good in that regard.
Well, it's funny that you say that because when I'm looking about the whole M Night Shyamalan the twist thing, what's really weird is, I mean, he has his first two films, Praying with Anger and Wide Awake, which people don't really factor those in. A lot of people would, they see The Sixth Sense as really starting his career. Now, obviously, The Sixth Sense is one of the most like famous twist endings of all time. But I'm looking at the other films, and it's like there's Unbreakable, which it does have a
It
twist
has a
ending,
twist,
but
yeah,
not
but I think
like,
the twist is earned in that film, and it's like again, it's part of that deconstruction.
and it's not a thing where it's like everything is building to the twist. It's not like a thing. It's not a movie that I would watch and be like, oh, wait till the twist ending. Like, no, it's just a good film in general. Um, which it's so weird though, because like Signs, I mean, I guess it has a twist ending,
Signs has a twist. It's again, it's the whole prediction alien thing that his faith being restored. It was, I mean, it's part of the twist, and the village obviously has a twist in it too.
Yeah, well, I think The Village is a movie that where it's like the difference between like Signs and The Village is is when I'm watching Signs, I feel like I'm much more invested in like what's going to happen to the family and how things are going to turn out with the aliens. With The Village, that's a movie where it's like something's fucky. Like the entire time something is going on, and you're kind of like that's sort of why like as much as crappy as they are, that's kind of why I still love like really like low rent horror movies or like even the Saw movies. I love them because the whole time I'm like, this is just fun, and then I just want to see what the twist ending is. I love that shit. It's just kind of weird that like he's known for like the twist ending, but that only seemed to happen. I almost wonder if it was only because of The Sixth Sense.
That was definitely part of it, and again, sometimes people's like first thing is so powerful that it defines the rest of their
And he
careers.
made probably one of the most famous, like if you say twist ending, that's like the go-to, along with maybe like Fight Club, The Usual Suspects. Yeah,
And like I said, he repeated it in other films as well, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, it's like critiquing Tarantino for his style. It's like it's what he does with his films, or Scorsese does with the whole narration and stuff like that. It's just part of their artistic style. It's not inherently a bad thing. But again, with Shyamalan, it felt like people kind of reduced him to that. It's almost a little bit like Jerry Seinfeld. Like if you were to parody Jerry Seinfeld, the first thing that would come to mind would be like, "What's the deal with airline food?" But he never actually said that. Like in Seinfeld, there were other people who were kind of making a joke about his like comedic style, but he himself never made the airline food joke. But it literally like has become his like trademark thing that people think about him as.
yeah. Well, he was always about. It was his thing was the observational comedy, so that was sort of like the yeah. Um, but yeah, it's just weird because I'm like, I don't know. It's like I feel like, I mean, granted, he did have after The Village, he made Lady in the Water. uh, you don't have to. The Happening, which was, you remember that one, Mark Wahlberg?
Yeah, The Happening was a weird one. That was like people. That was another one, like kind of like Signs, where people didn't know how to interpret it. Like, is this supposed to be a comedy? Like, it's that kind of stupid where it's like, but it's played kind of seriously too at the same time, and it's like tonally people just didn't like get it. And
It's hard because this is what's so interesting about like M Night's like whole filmography. I saw The Sixth Sense, I saw Signs, I saw The Village. Even if like the endings for the former two, they're not your fancy, these are very, very well directed films, especially in terms of like atmosphere, in terms of like just the camera movement, the some Signs still has some of the like best jump scares ever, and it that I have ever seen. In all honesty, there's the famous one with the kids watching the television, and then the alien like steps out from behind the bush, and then probably my favorite. It, it isn't as like infamous as that one, but it's the very end when they come out of the basement after they think the aliens are gone, and he wheels the television out, and then as he puts the television into place, you see the alien in the reflection just standing there. That's probably one of like I think that, and then he like slowly stands up and turns. It's like really really well done, and so because of that, it's hard for me when I watch the happening. I'm like, this has got to be intentional. There's no way. Like, what
No, that's what a lot of
happened?
people. There's a lot of people thought that like the twist, quote unquote, of that movie was that it's not a horror thriller, whatever film. It's a comedy film. It's so bad, it's like on purpose. Which
Which I'm like, okay, if that's the case, then this movie actually kind of slaps.
I don't know. I don't know if that's copium or not, though. Or if like, I mean, people like a director can make a shitty film, right? It's like it can happen. And a great example of that too, by the way, is the Avatar film
The
that
Last Airbender.
Shyamalan did. Which have you seen that movie?
I think I tried to watch it. So after I watched the whole Atlas series from my video, I went to try and watch that, and I got I think like 12 minutes into it, and then I realized that like, oh wow, this is like it's skipping over so much that's it's decimating characterization, and it just is not working. Now, to be fair, I do think the fact that and maybe I have to watch the whole thing. I'm sure I'm not going to like it anymore, but
No.
the fact that they had this one film try to encapsulate the entire first book, that's pretty wild. That I don't even
Yeah, you can't do that.
that seems unfeasible. I don't know I don't know if that was like a choice made by him, or if that was a choice made by like the producers, if that's what they
I mean,
wanted to
I
do.
don't know how else they could do it though. Which is again, this is before like nowadays they would never attempt to do this. They would make they make a TV show out of it,
Which
which
they
they are
are,
doing.
which
Yeah, Netflix
I
is
don't
doing.
really know if I how I feel about that either, but we'll see.
We'll see how it turns out. I think it'll be shitty, but we'll have to see. But
Yeah,
regardless, I think that it was just I don't think there was anyone who was gonna make it well. Not Shyamalan and not anyone else. Like in the early 2000s when this film came out, there just wasn't as much care put into like like being authentic to the source material. Like people like the studios at the time felt that they could kind of shit out whatever they wanted to and people would go see it, and they still obviously feel that way, but we see a lot of shitty adaptations. But I don't think they were ever going to give the budget they needed for doing like I mean, you'd have to do like 6 movies at least to cover the series, but they would never do that, and I don't think it would work out even if they did. So yeah, I mean, it was kind of doomed to fail from the start. I don't think Shyamalan really had any kind of passion for the source material, which is always a recipe for disaster. I think they just kind of handed him, and he took the check and was like, he did the best job he could, but yeah, it was definitely shit.
yeah, and it's weird too because that one in particular is like I almost wonder if that was a thing where he's like he tried his hand at like a big IP, and he realized, okay, well, hang on, this isn't gonna work.
Yeah, I think he just did it for the money, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I think they just offered him a big check, and he was just like, "All right, I'll give it a try."
And then he did After Earth with Will Smith and Jaden
That
Smith.
was him. I didn't even know that was his film. Oh
That
my
Yeah, well,
god.
that was I think that was kind of what they were hoping. They were kind of hoping it was like because he had accrued such a bad reputation that they were. But that's the whole weird thing. It's like if he had accrued such a bad reputation, why would you still give him the job? I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's the same thing with like Michael Bay, right? No one respects Michael Bay as like an auteur, but
Well,
his films make money.
but see, here's the thing though. I think so. Just to kind of go along with this, because I originally brought this up to talk about M Night because I kind of wanted to talk about directors who I think are overrated, in terms of sometimes people like, for example, I actually think Scorsese kind of falls into that. That's not to say that he has not made some of the most brilliant films of all time, hands down. But I do think it is um a case of like a lot of fanboys, especially, kind of, sucking his dick a little bit too hard. This is why for personally, I think The Departed is a film that I don't think it's a good movie. I think it's like it's well made, but it's got a lot of holes. The story does not make a whole lot of sense, and that's not really Scorsese's style anyway. This like big, like very plot heavy film. Um, but then on the other spectrum, you have someone like Michael Bay. And, I go through his filmography and I'm like, why does he have such a bad reputation? And it's like, I'm not saying that like some of these movies,
He's popular. That's why.
but I think maybe that's it. It's like, I'm looking through his movies. He did Bad Boys, which was a fun movie. It's a fine movie. The Rock, pretty badass movie. Armageddon, which for what it was, I don't know. uh, Pearl Harbor, that was not good. That's a bad one. Bad Boys 2, I don't know. I thought it was fun, action romp. Was it a good movie? Probably not. The Island, oh man, I saw that way back. I don't remember it being like that bad. Thought it was like a decent sci-fi whatever. And then he did all the Transformers movies. He did Pain and Gain, which was actually kind of did you see that one with Mark Wahlberg and The Rock? It's interesting. It's not like, I wouldn't say it's like a great movie, but it's like not a bad movie,
No, I mean that's his whole thing is like I don't even think any of the Transformers movies are like bad movies in the
right?
sense that they're just awful to watch. Like if I had no other choice but to watch Transformers Rise of the Beast, whatever the fuck it's called, I would put it on. I would just be like, all right, like this will entertain me for 2.5. He's an entertaining director, and I think that like hating on him is because he's popular, right? It's kind of like hating again. I think like Call of Duty, like we brought up earlier, like they're not really meant to be deep games or anything like that. They're just they're meant to be popular and something to just do, and put on and enjoy. And I think the same thing is true of Michael Bay. He makes big budget, action, entertaining films, but because especially it really started happening with the Transformers because those movies were just so popular and made so much fucking money. It became kind of trendy to be like, I don't watch this, mainstream crap. I watch Scorsese, right? I do like more intellectual types of films, which I think Scorsese is the same way in the sense that he makes just very entertaining films. A lot of them I don't know if they have a whole lot of depth in terms of like being deep character studies. Like Goodfellas, obviously one of the most entertaining films of all time that I could watch a million times and never get bored of it. Is it that deep of an exploration of Henry Hill? Not really. Like, I mean, it kind of is, but not really. I mean, you could definitely say something like Raging Bull is a deep character study of the Robert De Niro character.
Yeah, Taxi Driver and Raging Bull.
Taxi Driver is. But there's other one like The Irishman. It's like, it's just kind of
I thought
for
that
people who
was.
like mafia stuff.
I think The Irishman is a good example of film that it's like I really do not think it is nearly as good as a lot of people say it is.
I don't like The Irishman. I've said that before on this
Yeah,
podcast.
it's a
It is too
film.
long. It's kind of boring at times. I'm just gonna say
And
that.
to be clear, when I say it's too, if we say it's too long, that isn't to say that 3 hours or 3.5 hours is too long for any movie. Wolf of Wall Street was 3 hours, and I thought that was like a very well paced movie. Probably could still cut out a little bit, but for the most part, I thought Wolf of Wall Street at 3 hours, it was very well paced. Um, but The Irishman, and it kept like jumping back and forth, and it was like it just kind of didn't work the same way that Goodfellas worked, that Casino worked, that Wolf of Wall Street worked.
Yeah.
Um,
Casino too is like one of those movies where they're entertaining. I don't know how deep it is in terms of like getting into like Lefty's head.
and but here's and just to and I think this is the thing. I don't think Goodfellas was like trying to be a huge expose, like because like we've seen Scorsese do that. We've seen Taxi Driver. We've seen Raging Bull. We know he can do that. But Goodfellas was more. it was more of this like it was more of an exploration of gangster life. It was an exercise in filmmaking. Same with Casino in many ways,
Yeah,
and
it's, I
that's
mean, it's entertaining.
and that's the thing. It's like when people are like ranking movies, it's so weird. Like I am not going to. I think that Goodfellas is a brilliant movie, but I don't see it as like a deep character study on like Henry Hill, like you said. But that's because the film isn't trying to be like a deep exploration of like Henry Hill's psychology. But then when we look at someone like Michael Bay in the Transformers movies, what is Transformers trying to do? What is the intention of the movie?
To be a big blockbuster, entertaining, some are spectacular.
It's a movie about because people want to see robots kick the shit out of each other, which it did. Which it was, yeah, that's exactly what it did. It made almost 700 million dollars.
Well, that's the thing too. I think about films sometimes is we really try to like, especially film snobs like us, try to look at films as like, how do they stack up as art and these these masterpieces of human like psychological understanding, all that kind of stuff. But we have to think that film is just a medium, and that not all film is trying to be a super deep work of art. I mean, when film was just getting started, when movies were just coming out, they weren't about telling particularly deep stories or deep character analysis. Just the novelty of having someone be on screen and you're like, oh cool, I'm watching like a movie, like that was just cool in and of itself. And if you look back at like a lot of the old classic films, a lot of them are not trying to do something like a novel would do. They're just trying to tell an entertaining story, and the fact that it's happening live it's happening on film in front of people, that novelty is enough to draw people in. And again, there's filmmaking techniques that they're developing and storytelling techniques, and then every film that comes out afterwards is just trying to raise the bar a little bit, and some of them raise the bar by again telling really deep stories and stuff like that, but others are raising the bar in different ways of just like increasing the spectacularness of what the film is doing. I mean, you could argue that Michael Bay's his explosions, that's his stereotype, right? Michael Bay, the whole explosion thing, that's carrying on the legacy of something like the Great Train Robbery, which wasn't even really telling a story. I mean, it kind of was, but it was just like, look at this train moving, isn't that fucking cool? So
Or
every artist has different intentions.
or Duel by Steven Spielberg, which is just about a guy who's being hunted by a massive tanker trucker. And the whole movie, we never actually find out who's behind the wheel. It's just and like, but that's okay because that's what the film is trying to do. It's trying to be a thriller. It's not trying to be like a why aren't we understanding why don't we know about the driver's psychology? What's something else kind of because I'm actually in relation to Avatar. I think another thing that kind of we've kind of been or people kind of complain about in a weird sort of like inconsistent manner is when villains, um, whether you're because like over the last like I'd probably say like I'm not gonna say I don't want to say like because there were plenty of villains before this that were like that, but I think especially in the last like 10, 15, 20 years or so, I definitely have seen at least when it comes to like film discourse, a lot of people praising villains who have are like very empathetic, like villains who are like much more morally gray, who kind of fall on that line. And that may have coincided with like the rise of like the anti-hero with like television, Breaking Bad, all that. Um, but I think unfortunately people sort of now it kind of has gone too far where people will see this like a regular old like classic villain and it's some all of a sudden it's like, oh, there's something wrong with that. Like, oh, Scar from The Lion King, how come he doesn't have like a tragic backstory? How come he or better example is all the what was it, Cruella? Oh man, we have to give her this woman who wants to murder dogs for their coats. We should give her a tragic backstory. And it's like you're kind of missing the point of her character. She was always supposed to just be a an entertaining bad guy. The reason I brought up Avatar is because Ozai, people, one of the critiques I see is that he's so one dimensional. It's like that's not inherently a bad thing. It's not inherent. If anything, I think it's kind of annoying when every time I see a film and the villain's doing horrible stuff, they're like, "Yeah, but he had a bad childhood, bro." It's like it just feels so forced.
I think yeah, you're right. A lot of the lessons about villains has kind of been, again, make them have tragic backstories or make them have complex motivations, when I do think you want the villain to be like likable in some way, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that they have to be like sympathetic and like, I think Cruella DeVille in the original 101 Dalmatians is an entertaining and likable villain because she's
Yes.
so over the top, and so like they give them, like, just give them like cool stuff, cool interesting personalities. Like they don't necessarily have to be sympathetic in terms of, again, we have to, she's killing the dogs to make up with her mother. I don't even remember what the fuck the Cruella movie was about, but
The dogs like knocked her mother over a cliff, or I don't
yeah,
know.
something like that, some
It's so
bullshit.
ridiculous.
It's so stupid. But I think you want him to be cool in some way. Like give him something that's like, oh, okay, I'm entertained by watching this person. There's a ton of villains that have no redeeming qualities, but they're just so fucking badass or just entertaining to watch in general that it's fun to see them fight. I think I mean, there's just so many examples. I mean, you can think of like the Joker in The Dark Knight, right? Quintessentially one of people's favorite bad guys of all time. There's no tragic. I mean, he tells some tragic backgrounds, but it's heavily implied that he's just lying about his backstory. He tells a different one every time he tells the story. But he's just so weird and so interesting to watch that you're just fascinated by him. I just want to see more of him, and I want to see him go head to head with Batman.
Or Hannibal Lecter from Silence of the Lambs, or Hans Gruber.
You know what though, they gave him a tragic backstory too in
We don't talk about
one of
that.
the prequel movies. Yeah,
We don't
so but
talk about
that's
that movie.
but that's literally like a perfect example of like again, taking the wrong lessons. The original Silence of the Lambs, he's just so weird and interesting that you just want to see him. But they, again, the more they do it, the more they kind of lean on the kind of cliche storytelling. Just give him like a tragic backstory or something.
That's what makes Hannibal Lecter in part like so brilliant as a or horrifying, is the fact that like this isn't a person who has like, oh, he was once a good, a good boy who eventually, got corrupted or something. It's like, no, this is a person who is like so utterly psychopathic that you can't reason with Hannibal Lecter. You cannot, this isn't a person that you can like talk out of like doing something bad. He's just so utterly unempathetic that he's capable of anything, and that's what makes him so horrifying. And so to give him, I know we don't, I don't. I'm actually, after Avatar, I'm doing a video on the Hannibal the television show, and I'm actually gonna start by going over the 5 films, which are based off of the 4 novels, and I'm just gonna rip. I don't even want to talk about Hannibal Rising, but I'm probably gonna like go into it. But I'm like, God damn it!
Literally, the only two good films of that series are Silence of the Lambs, and I like Red Dragon too.
Manhunter's fun. Did you see Manhunter?
Well, okay, so Manhunter though is not a part of the canon of the other films, right? It's like separate.
Yeah, so they bumped his role up in Red Dragon because they were banking on like, hey, Anthony Hopkins is back as Hannibal Lecter. That's really what they were. I almost wonder how many people were pissed off when they went to see that movie, and they were like, "Who's this other
Yeah,
dude? Who's the Tooth Fairy? What the fuck?"
yeah.
And then Hannibal was pretty bad with Julianne. They didn't even get to bring back Jodie Foster. I
Mm-hmm.
actually don't remember why. I wonder if there was a reason, but
Yeah, I don't. I don't. I mean, I saw Hannibal. I never watched Hannibal Rising. I saw Hannibal once, like a long time ago, so I don't even remember it. But Yeah, I feel like there's only I only saw those two that I liked, which was Red Dragon and Silence of the Lambs. But yeah, that's definitely a franchise that went downhill. But you know what the other thing about villains is, which the opposite end of it, which I don't like, is when they give the villains nothing likable about them at all. I'm thinking of someone like Draco Malfoy in the Harry Potter films, which is he's a horrible antagonist for Harry Potter in the early films because one, he's not strong, like he's not a threat to Harry as a villain, and two, he's got nothing likable about him. He's a whiny, snivelly guy, and so he's just pointless. Now they do try to give him something kind of like tragic in the sixth movie or whatever, and they kind of make him more sympathetic later on, but they don't really make him any more likable. He's not strong or anything like that. So that's an example of, I think, when you don't give the villain enough stuff going on with them. Villains who are at least a threat are good because they're entertaining, and villains who are like, badasses are entertaining too. But when you give them like nothing like that, it's just I don't even want to see him.
Yeah, it's the issue with Draco is that like you said, they tried to make him like, well, I don't even know if they tried to make him like empathetic. They tried to like make you pity him at the end, because of like how awful his parents were. But when you have him being such a antagonistic, like like he like straight up did like horrible shit to the others. He basically called Hermione like the wizarding N word, basically. um, yeah, I think they were even like, didn't he try to like get them killed at one point? Probably, I don't know. Um,
I think there's just nothing redeemable about him throughout
yeah,
most of the
so
films, and there's nothing likable about him either. I mean, at least with Voldemort, who's not really a character either, he's at least a threat where you're like, okay, something bad could happen here. He takes people out, but yeah, Draco is a horrible, horrible villain for the early Harry Potter books, and
yeah,
um, yeah, I think they learned their lesson with that. The more it went on.
I think you put it well. I think when we're talking about like, I think people think of like, oh, what makes a good villain is they have to be like morally complex and morally gray. Or it's funny because like even people, Thanos from Infinity War, that was like a big, I don't want to say zeitgeist moment, but I definitely think that was like when this sort of conversation piped up for a lot of people, where it's like every villain's got to be like morally gray and whatever. But what's so funny is that in retrospect, like Thanos is nuts. Like he's just insane. Like his entire plan makes no fucking sense.
It's not even that he's insane. He's just stupid. It's like, okay, so you're gonna reduce the population in half, even though people will just continue to breed, and the same exact thing will happen. And I don't even understand how the Infinity Gauntlet works, which is supposedly it's destroyed when he does it, so he can only do the snap once. Which means that okay, maybe he bought the universe like a few million years as people like repopulate, but the same exact problem is going to happen again.
Maybe it's like, oh well, this time they'll listen. It's like I don't know. Or maybe they're gonna be so traumatized that they're all gonna like off
Well,
themselves. I don't know,
but
bro.
that's not what he says the plan is. I mean, if that was the plan, I think it would still be stupid. But at least there's some kind of like thought behind it.
Hmm.
I've been watching a lot of like, well, not a lot of, but I've been watching Attack on Titan recently. Um, have you seen that series?
No, not a bit. I've considered it. I think I saw like the pilot, but
It's interesting. It's got some cool moments. Definitely, I think there's a lot. It has a lot of problems too, but it has this kind of like a lot of animes I've seen have done this kind of thing where the main problem or the main motivation that a lot of the characters have is this very kind of philosophical esoteric thing, kind of like Thanos, which is his whole motivation is stopping overpopulation, which is not like it's hard to make that a very personable conflict versus another type of villain might be like I'm trying to get revenge or I'm trying to save someone I love. That's something that's very relatable versus the whole like thing where I'm going to save the universe or I'm going to save humanity or something is too high concept to really get invested into. And I've seen a lot of animes do stuff like that, and I really don't like it. I much prefer when the conflict is something that like is smaller in scope, but is much more directly tied to the individual characters, like, history or motivations.
When we're talking about like what makes a good villain, like you said, even if we go like with Thanos, I think what's more interesting about him is his. It's not so much like he's nuts, but it's more of his like determination. Like he's a person who like thinks he's so correct, and that he's or the scene where with Gamora, he's a person who thinks he's so correct that he's willing to kill someone that he actually loves to do it. And I think that is the key. It's not so much that like, oh, he has like understandable motivations, like kind of not really, but it's the fact that what else is going on and he's so that level of like determined and that sort of one one what's what I'm looking for, one road higher the highway. I think that's what more and then Josh Brolin's performance, of course. Or even like I mentioned Hans Gruber in um Die Hard. That's a case where it's like there's nothing redeemable. He's just a bad guy. He's a bank robber. But it's the fact that he's just Alan Rickman's charisma. He's one of my favorite scenes, probably in any movie, is the scene where John has him at gunpoint, and then he fakes the American accent, pretending that he's a hostage. Probably like that's one of my favorite moments of any movie ever, because now you've shown that like the whole time you have John McClane, who's this guy who's very resourceful and like can think on his feet, and then you realize, oh, his enemy is also extremely not just intelligent, not just ruthless, but also someone who can really think on their feet. It was very
You got to make them
fascinating.
competent to make them, again,
That's a good way to
really
put it. Yes,
threatening, really believable. Otherwise, there's just no point in even seeing the conflict, because it's like it's so one sided. I think a lot of shows go too far the opposite direction, which is, again, the villain is so weak and pathetic, and the only way that they've even gotten to the point where they are is because of the plot requires them to have gotten there, and
yeah,
then they're defeated way too easily. And it's just annoying, and it makes me hate the main characters too, because I just feel like you don't deserve this victory, so why should I even fucking care?
exactly. That's a great way to put it. Um, yeah, I don't know. It just kind of wrap it back around when we're talking about because we were talking before about like directors and stuff. Yeah, there seems to be like this sort of like film, and that's kind of like why it's like the whole like film bro arrogance. It's like there's instead of like looking at films as they are as like pieces of work and what and taking into account what is the film trying to do. Sometimes it feels like a lot of film criticism is trying to there's so much other stuff around. Like, with Michael Bay or M. Night Shyamalan, it's like, oh, these aren't good directors. So when I look at their films, I have to go in like if it's a bad film. Or a Scorsese. It's so much harder for people, I think, to like critique his work because it's like, oh, what if I say a Scorsese film isn't very good? And then if you do, you're like, oh, you're being contrarian. Like there's so much of this shit where it's like it almost makes it difficult to it makes it difficult to sort of just interact with any of these people because it's like I don't even know where you're. I don't even know if you're like acting in good faith, or maybe you think you're acting in good faith. I don't even know.
Well, the thing about film criticism is that most people doing it don't know what they're talking about for the most part, including myself. I don't know really jack shit about film. So
Well,
what
you admit it.
well what they can do, though, since they can't really they don't understand the filmmaking process or what goes into like making films, or most of the time don't even really understand cinematography beyond the extremely obvious thing. The Scorsese example would be like that tracking shot when they go into the Coca Cabana. Like, that's something that's so obvious you can't even miss it. But there's plenty of other stuff in the film that they wouldn't even be able to grasp. But the one thing left to them is talking about plot holes, or talking like critiquing the story, which is not to say that the story is not important in any way, but it's just like the reason. Like, if you watch any kind of review, they hone in on like the plot holes and the storytelling so much, because that's something that is just extremely obvious, and it's there for them to analyze. versus all the rest of the stuff that goes into making a film. You know, cinematography, sound design, production, all that kind of stuff is not something they're familiar with, so they can't really talk about it in depth like they can just being like, it doesn't really make sense that the Transformers, you know, came from this planet because like how would they have like where would they go to the bathroom, like, you know, it's just that kind of like superficial critiques of what the film's about.
Yeah, and which and this and I think that's another issue I have too, which I see is that that's not to say that I don't think that sort of stuff it shouldn't be completely written off, because there are cases where like certain stuff like that can be a perfect example is for me with Looper. That's a film where like the whole plot, the entire central like setup of the film about like loopers and like sending people back in time, it makes no sense. Like none of it makes any sense. Um to the point where it's like that for me is like it actually hurts the film, because the entire time I'm like looking at it like it's like, oh well, just go along with it, just forget about it. It's like, or even the entire thing of like time travel rules in general. Like the reason a film like Terminator works is because do the time travel rules like really make all that much sense? No. But is the film trying to be like a movie about like the ethics of time travel? Like no, it's trying to be like an action movie. The time travel is just a device to get you there. Whereas a film like Looper, the the rules of time travel actually do play a big role later down in the line of like the story. So okay, so in that case, if this isn't airtight, now this doesn't make any sense. Now this is actually hurting the film, because you're almost like people are like, don't think about it, but the film is telling me to think about it. So how can we not?
Well, I think the thing
Yeah.
about Looper too that is such a problem is that it's not even just that the time travel doesn't make sense or whatever, or you know it bothers people when they think about that kind of stuff. I think it also gets in the way of the character development of the thing, which I mean I saw Looper once and like you, I was like it bothered me all the time. I didn't think the film made sense in terms of what it was trying to say, but I didn't get why. So I mean the spoiler alert or whatever, and funny enough, this spoiler involves Bruce Willis, would bring it all the way back to the Sixth Sense in that regard. But spoiler alert: the main character and Bruce Willis's character are the same person, and they become a bad guy in the future who's out to kill the young kid who will become a bad guy in the future. And I just didn't understand how, if the film is saying that the future can be affected by stuff in the past, why he couldn't just choose not to do that thing that he's going to do, and why he needed, like, he kills himself at the end to stop himself from going back to kill the little kid, which will set off the events of the future. But I didn't understand why if this is so important, why can't he just make a decision at that point not to do the thing in the future? I just didn't get it.
Yeah, it was very, and that's the thing, it's like that's the whole point, is because again, if you just don't want me to think about it, that's fine. But if the entire crux of the plot and the story and the characters like relies on you understanding the rules of time travel, like okay, now all of a sudden this is a problem. It can be interesting, it can be like some cool visually, but it's doesn't really hold up. So the reason I bring that up is because yeah, I have no problem with people saying stuff like, you know, it's like putting up plot holes and stuff like that. That's fine. But what bugs me is when it's not consistent through movies. So for example, The Departed is like, you know, all those, this is a film that like, oh, so many film bros love, and like it's Scorsese, yeah. Have you seen The Departed?
Yeah, and I like The
Okay.
Departed. We talked about this. Like, I saw your video critiquing it, and I it helped me realize a lot of the flaws the film has. But I still walk away from that film liking it just because, again, like we were talking about before, I agree with a lot of the stuff that doesn't make sense or clashes tonally with the rest of the film. But there's something that's just so atmospheric about that film. I kind of don't care that much.
Yeah, and I think that's fine to say, that you can say, hey, I said the same thing about Saving Private Ryan, where I actually think the film itself, the script, has a lot of problems, a lot of thematic problems, a lot of just logic problems. But Spielberg is such a good filmmaker, um, that it just allows me to kind of overlook them. But if we're gonna go, like you said, if we're gonna be the people who are like pointing out, you know, little things in plot and being very specific, okay, then we have to do that equally. Like, so for example, one of the biggest things that I hate about The Departed is at the end of the movie, after Leonardo DiCaprio finds out that Matt Damon is the mole and he gets the box of tapes from Costello proving that he's the mole. Why does he tell him to meet him on the rooftop? Remember, he meets him on the rooftop and then they yell at each other and then
I remember that scene. I don't even remember why they were up there. And
it's
again, that's kind of like a statement about like I almost don't care a lot about the plot. There's just something that's cool about that film that's like I don't know, the way they talk to each other, the way that like I don't know, it just like I said, it's atmospheric. And I
yeah.
agree with like I said, I saw your video and I agreed with like almost everything you said. I was like, oh yeah, that kind of doesn't make sense, or this clashes with the rest of the film. I don't know why they did this, but you're just so lost in these kind of charismatic characters that you just like I said, for most people, I don't even think it registers with them.
And that's fine, and I agree with that. I think that's like because you're taking into account the many different aspects of a film. But to your point, what really bugs me is when people will let it slide for one film, so like for like Looper or for The Departed, but then for another film, then they'll just tear it apart and they won't even care about anything. Oh, this movie is a classic, but it's bad because of this little plot issue. And it's like, well, if that's the only thing that you're talking about when you're ranking a film, then you have to, again, um, you have to dole that out equally.
Yeah, and I think, like I said, it comes down to like people will forgive the little stuff that's wrong with your film if you have enough good stuff going on.
Yeah,
When you don't have enough good stuff going on, that's when people really start to get into it and start picking it apart. Or if there's something that's like really out there that they don't like. Um, but I think for most of the films, like I mean, I think most people would agree that like every film probably has its plot holes or stuff that doesn't make sense. But if you're just entertained enough by the thing, most people just overlook it.
yeah. And again, I think that's fine. But again, if we're gonna, we have to be consistent with it. Yeah, I think that's sort of like what my big issue is like, I think a lot of people, whether it's like Michael Bay or M. Night or another perfect example is Zack Snyder. I think he's a filmmaker who will never get a fair shake. And by that I mean I don't actually. I think on both sides of the aisle, I think there are people who are like Snyder fanboys who will like, especially his films because they've like become weirdly politicized. Like it's I don't even know how like that was such like something to do with like his Justice League cut. I don't exactly know, but it was he's a filmmaker I think where I I actually think a few of his films are pretty decent. I thought his Dawn of the Dead remake was fine. 300 I think for what it was pretty good. Um yeah, it's just it, but then people see, oh, it's a Snyder film, we can't like it. But then there are other people, it's a Snyder film, oh, we have to like it. And at that point it's just like how do we even like rank, how do we even like talk about film criticism if it's so caught up in all of this like stupid shit?
Yeah, I don't. Zack Snyder is one of those directors who I don't even actually. I didn't when you said that I didn't actually know what films he directed aside from the DC superhero films because obviously I know about the Snyder cut or
Of
whatever.
course.
But I actually didn't even know off the top of my head that he directed 300 or Watchmen, which if you look at his films, most of them have been the DC films. And even
Hmm.
you could say Watchmen is kind of in that spirit, like the kind of sort of stylized, action heavy superhero films. Only Dawn of the Dead and 300 before that I didn't even, and I guess Sucker Punch 2 is on there too. Um, but yeah, he's one of those ones who I like. I didn't even know what to think about him when people brought up his name just because I was like, I only associated with like one film. which again was the DC films.
Yeah, and even the DC films, I'm like, I mean, like some of them, I don't think they're good. I think they're interesting. I think Batman's for Superman. I like the ideas that it presented. I don't think it was executed that well. But that's another thing too, is that I feel like even that statement is like one that like people won't even accept. It's like, hey, I thought that the film brought up some really interesting ideas, but they didn't execute them well. And like, I think I can say that about a film, but then when people either like, no, man, the themes were amazing and it was like this is what it was trying to do and it nailed it and it was perfect and amazing, or it's like, oh no, the ideas were so stupid they go against canon. My idea of Superman, yada yada yada, and it was terrible and bad. And it's like, okay, this is why did Snyder, maybe it's because he did tackle the Justice League and like um all these like very like famous beloved characters. Maybe it's just weird how like Snyder has become like hyper politicized weirdly. I don't know why
Yeah,
of all the
I don't
filmmakers.
know either. And I thought so. He again, he's one of those films I don't even like have a style of his where I can kind of keep track of him in my mind. Again, maybe that's just because I haven't seen a lot of his films, but I was getting him confused with the other superhero director I think of, which is Bryan Singer, who directed a lot of the X-Men
Oh
movies.
yeah, yeah.
And I honestly couldn't even tell them apart of like who directed which movie again, because I don't see a consistent style in the films that I've seen where it's like some directors have this like a really like unique style where you instantly recognize a film of theirs, but like watching the X-Men movies, I couldn't tell you that like X-Men 1 and 2 were directed by someone different than X-Men 3 versus all the rest of the films. It's just like they're so generic almost that, and again, maybe that's just a factor of them being superhero films to kind of have their own like studio directives they have to follow. But yeah, I couldn't tell you the difference.
Yeah. And then I mean, even I think we've even talked about it before, but I honestly even think this is true when it comes to like a lot of old like classic cinema or like foreign cinema. There's a lot of shit there. There's a lot of just like a lot of movies that are just a waste of your time. Um, but because they're in black and white and because they're like there's a voiceover and there's a blonde woman who's just walking around doing stuff, it's like, oh, it's art. And it's like, no, you can criticize a film for being dumb. Like it's fine. Even if it's a classic film, you can criticize it. It's fine.
Yeah,
Um,
I've never like fucked around with too many foreign films aside from obviously the very mainstream stuff like Kurosawa or something like that. But um, yeah, I've never been a foreign film bro. I know there's a ton of those guys out there.
well, that's the thing. It's like the whole thing with it is just we the whole point of film criticism is to like criticize the film and what it's trying to do and the themes and the plot and the actor, all that stuff. But it seems like it, like especially nowadays with like the whole thing with you know um, fanboying and it's sort of like a your top 10 movies are like a status of who you are as a person and shit like that. It just gets to the point where film criticism becomes a proxy for like so many other things that people are worried about like you know wanting to fit in with a certain like sect of the online discourse or something and like crap like that. And that's like that's part of the reason why I hate it so much, where it's just or I'm starting to like become like embittered towards it because it's just not even fun. Like we're not even talking about the films anymore. We're talking about what does it mean if this person doesn't like or does like this film.
Well, I've said this before in the podcast, which is as much as I'm a part of this too, because I lean into that sometimes. I don't fundamentally think that there's that much of a difference between the highest quality film or television show of all time and the lowest quality one. Like I don't think there's like a huge objective difference between the two things. Like we as a person can be like, "Oh yeah, The Sopranos is the greatest thing ever and it's so much better than The Walking Dead or whatever." But why? I don't like I mean, I could list the reasons why I think that's true, but they would kind of just be my own personal tastes. And if someone liked The Walking Dead more than The Sopranos or whatever, I don't know. I don't think there's like an objective argument I could make of why they were wrong, or nor would I want to. But like, even if I did want to, I don't think like art is this subjective thing where I don't think there's an objective truth behind any of it, and it just comes down to like again what we individually prefer. And obviously I make a lot of content about stuff that I think is the best shows of all time, like Sopranos, Wire, Mad Men, whatever. But it's just because I like those shows. I think they're deep, and I like talking about them. But I guess I don't know how much of a difference there really is between any of this stuff.
That's why it's so. I mean, like if you look at like uh, when we're talking about like best films of all time, a lot of that's done by consensus. So like the Sight and Sound, they'll ask people for the top 10 films, and then they'll just rank it by the films that show up the most. I think that's like the best way to do it, because it's like, yeah, again, it's like, hey, is what film is better, Blade Runner or Citizen Kane? And I'm like, what is that? What are you even talking about? Like, what are we even, or like The Sopranos or The Walking Dead? Now, granted, I would say The Sopranos is better, but that's because I The Walking Dead has a lot of very glaring flaws in and of itself. But again, it's like I could see someone saying like, oh, but I prefer Walking Dead over Sopranos. That's fine. I'm not going to think that you're like a bad person for that, but
Well, I mean, but the problem too with those ranking lists is again it encourages what we said before, which is once the top 10 list comes out, then it's just people are like, okay, these are my
exactly.
top 10 and it just keeps repeating itself over and over again. And I again, even if you believe that there is a difference between like something like Citizen Kane and Transformers, right? I guess you could make that argument. It's much harder to make that argument between what's the difference between Citizen Kane and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, right? Both critically acclaimed movies. They're so close together that how could you rank them one above the other? Like it doesn't make any kind of
What
sense
are
at
we even
all.
talking about when we're saying which
Yeah,
one's
so
better than the other one?
I
Yeah.
think that like any kind of ranking is, I mean, it's fun. Like I said, don't get me wrong. I've done like a top 10 list and stuff before when people ask me. We like to put things into like these objective lists just for fun. Like I've done the tier list of like my favorite episodes of The Sopranos, even though all the episodes are important in and of themselves, or The Wire is the same way. But I think again, if you're just trying to have fun with it and share your love of these things, it's fine to be kind of like ironically elitist about some of this stuff. But when you start taking it way too seriously, then it's like, come on, man, it's just a fucking movie. Like, who gives a fuck?
And this is us saying this from people who like really love film and cinema and all this stuff. It's still at the end of the day just like their movies and TV shows, and it's when I start to see people like, yeah, the kind of people who it's like, if I insult or if I critique like your favorite show and you take it as like a personal insult, you need to
Well,
reassess.
you're gonna get that when you do the Avatar video finally. But
I
you'll
I
just
honestly like unironically, I'm starting to realize that like I do think there's a lot of cope in the Avatar fandom where it's like I think I have some pretty solid critiques, and I think, and I've actually Googled them for like other people. It's like, hey, am I the one who feels this way? And I think people like lay out like very strong arguments, and all the comments are just like, I respect your opinion, but you're fucking wrong. Like it's like there's no like, or like it's it's one of those things where it's like the amount of leeway they give Avatar, they would never give to any other show ever. And it's like, okay, it seems like part of the reason why you're doing this is because you're very emotionally invested in it, which is fine. But like, let's call us, we can call a spade a spade. It's okay. You and I, we love The Sopranos. I can tell you, I probably have way more things that I could critique The Sopranos on than someone who doesn't even like the show.
oh, definitely.
Yeah, but
And I'm gonna get that same shit too when I eventually shit on Better Call Saul. So
don't.
it's just natural for what we do. But I think that's a good place to end this episode. We're at our hour. Thank you all for listening. If there's a weird edit in the middle, it's because Matt kind of cut out for a little while there.
Yeah, that might be.
But I'll patch it up. So anyway, thank you guys for listening, and stay tuned for the next episode. No One's a Critic coming soon.
Take care, y'all.